ParentalRights.us.
Welcome to Film School Radio, the on-air online showcase for the best in independent documentary and foreign films, every Friday morning from 9 to 10 a.m. Pacific and online at filmschoolradio.com. I'm your host, Mike Kaspar. A shocking expose on the inner workings of a $50 billion a year U.S. family law industry, Divorce Corp., shines a bright light on the appalling waste and the shameless, collusive practices seen daily in family courts. It is a stunning documentary that anyone considering marriage or divorce must see. And that is the truth. We're joined today by the director of Divorce Corp., George Sorg, a first-time filmmaker, and George, and Joe, welcome to Film School. Wow. Sorry about that. Welcome to Film School, Joe.
Thank you, Mike.
All right. Yes, it is something that everybody that I know has been touched by divorce, and the rate at which people in my life have either been in divorce or are considering divorce is a stunningly high number. Tell me a little bit about what the impetus that caused you to decide you wanted to do a documentary on this subject.
Well, you're right, Mike. 40 to 50% of people who get married in the United States end up getting divorced. And I had a personal experience with this. My personal experience wasn't so bad. But I did have the opportunity to sit through many hours of family court and watch other cases be heard by the judge. And I was shocked at what I saw. The system is quite dysfunctional. It takes an enormous amount of time to process something that seems like it could be relatively simple. There are delays and continuances. And I also witnessed what I felt was an unhealthy collaboration between the lawyers and the judges. They seemed to know each other very well. You could see the body language, the smirks, the smiles that they send to each other. It was like an insider job where the litigants were marching through. They were grist for the mill, but the insiders were just taking advantage of it. And so my instincts were borne out when we did some research, and we came across dozens, if not hundreds of people with terrible stories and terrible outcomes of losing their children, going bankrupt because of the process, having lawyers kind of take them down the rabbit hole and then abandon them when they ran out of money. And so we concluded that this was an interesting subject to make a film about.
Well, it is, and I said in the opening that this is a $50 billion a year industry. Is it fair to call it an industry?
Oh, I think it is. I mean, it's government. It's run by the government.
Yeah.
But most, you don't get a free lawyer. And if you can't afford a lawyer in divorce court, they do not give you a lawyer. You have to pay for it on your own. And so, people feel compelled to hire a lawyer because it's so complex. I mean, if you look at the family code, it's 2,000 pages of thin paper and microprint written in a language that most people can't understand.
Yeah.
And, it's a nightmare if you get into it on your own. And so, you would think the government would make it easy for people, but they haven't tried at all.
Yeah.
At least the IRS has the 1040 EZ form that you could fill out. It's 1 or 2 pages and send it in if your situation is not complex. But it's not the same way in family court. Mm-hmm. There are depositions and discovery and interrogatories and just a lot of language and procedures that people don't understand. They don't know how to behave in front of the judge. No one tells you how to behave in front of the judge. And people feel just completely overwhelmed with it. And so they entrust their lawyer to take them through the process in a productive way. But frankly, the lawyers have no incentive to make it efficient or painless. They, in fact, get paid by the hour, so the longer it takes, the more money they make.
Yeah, and you have this sort of perfect storm of two emotionally wrought people engaged in a very, very personal endeavor. And they both have a very specific interest, their own interest, as well as the I say the interest of their children. I mean that in a very in more of a selfish way, more often than not. Well, I shouldn't say it that way, but they have a lot of very emotionally driven rationales for being there and for fighting tooth and nail on behalf of their own interest. Did I say that?
Well,
Is that a good way to
I
put
think,
it?
yeah. I mean, I would summarize it that breaking up is hard to do just on its own.
Yeah.
Never mind that you have to go through this process that you don't understand,
Yeah.
where you are, herded through like cattle, where you're treated like an annoyance by the judge, where your lawyer is making money off of you by the hour, and you don't know what that lawyer is doing. You don't understand why they're doing it. If you want to stand up and say something in court, they tell you to sit down and not say anything. And so, and the tragedy is that, the court system in the United States is based on the English adversarial court system, where, the parties argue as zealously as they can for their own position in front of the judge, and then the judge decides who's made the better argument.
Yeah.
And that's just not the way to handle a family matter.
Yeah.
As you say, these are very personal matters. When you're married to someone, you trust them that, with your secrets and all that. And then suddenly you're in this courtroom where you're supposed to try to win.
Yeah.
And, divorce, when you're breaking up, you should be figuring out how to peacefully go your separate ways, wish the other side well, help the other side out if you can. But it shouldn't be this adversarial battle that is the very fundamental basis for how we divorce in the United States.
We're speaking with the director of the film Divorce Corp, Joe Sorge, and the film opens today here in Southern California, and across quite a lot of openings across the state of California, at least, and beyond. But you're going to be tonight in San Diego for the opening. Is that correct, for the opening of the show?
Yeah, personally, I will be at the 8:45 p.m. opening at the AMC in Fashion Valley in San Diego. And we're going to have a question and answer period afterwards where we're going to have an attorney, we're going to have a domestic violence advocate, anti-domestic violence advocate, I should say.
Yeah.
And we're going to have a retired police officer who has been involved in many domestic violence and domestic disputes, who now counsels people on how to try to resolve their issues without being so adversarial.
So, in addition to being in San Diego tonight, you're going to be at the Encino Town Center tomorrow.
Yes, tomorrow night, the 7:10 p.m. Lendley Encino Town Center. 7:10 showing. Dr. Drew's going to be at that one.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a fairly large event.
Yeah.
So we're excited about that. And then also I'll be at Orange, the Orange AMC at 1:35 tomorrow, and we're going to have a question and answer period after that one as well.
Okay. And you just brought up Dr. Drew Pinsky narrates the documentary. Does a great job. He's a very calming countenance about him, and very deliberate, and he delivers a lot of important information in a way that's easy to digest. And that's, I think, the strength of this film is you walk through a number of sort of conceptions or misconceptions about divorce, some of which I'd like to talk a little bit about, and that is the idea of the prenuptial agreement between, and the effectiveness in a divorce proceeding, how well that holds up or not holds up. You do explode a lot of these myths about that. Talk a little bit about prenups and just...
Sure. So a prenup is an agreement that parties enter into typically before they get married. And what it says is, regardless of what the law says, this is how we're going to handle things should we get divorced. And, the American laws were set up for the way couples related to each other in the 1950s and prior to that. And we've had a lot of such change in our society since then. It used to be that the man went to work and the woman stayed at home, and she sacrificed her career and she raised the children. And so, if there was a divorce, oftentimes it was difficult for her to get employment. She had given up her education or her career, and so there was a great need for support payments to take care of the woman. But things have changed now. Women are 50% of the United States workforce. Women the ages 25 to 35 now get paid 94% of what men earn, and when there's the same education and the same job, they get 100% of what men make. 80% of U.S. families have two wage earners. So things have changed dramatically, and these laws are appropriate in certain situations, but not appropriate in most of situations. The majority of U.S. households have two wage earners, and so prenups have almost become a necessity because the laws just no longer apply to the marital relationship. The problem is that the courts like to have a provider and a dependent and award dependent support because the states get federal matching funds for every dollar of support that's collected by the state.
Oh. Okay.
Moreover, most people don't know that. It's called Title 4D. And it's an enormous amount of money. There's $44 billion a year awarded in support payments. And so that brings money into the states from the federal government because they match. The other thing that people don't know is you can spend child support on legal fees. And so the more the court awards child support, the more the recipient of that child support is able to pay their lawyer for the work. And so, I'm afraid, and it's a little sinister, but I'm afraid that some of the motivation that takes place in the courtroom is to increase the state coffers with its federal matching funds for dependent support and to provide a mechanism by which the aggressive litigant, the one who's dragging the couple into the courtroom, can pay off their lawyer at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a shocking revelation, and I'm sure most people, I'm sure very few people actually know that.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I didn't answer your question. So this is why prenups sometimes don't hold up, because sometimes the prenup will say, okay, there's not going to be any alimony at the end of the divorce. And then what the judge will say is, well, that's not appropriate in this situation. We really think, no matter what the prenup says, we think that's unconscionable, and so therefore we're going to award alimony anyway. And so you get this, and they come up with some justification that, well, the couple didn't really thoroughly discuss the prenup ahead of time. One of the parties had a head cold on the day they signed it, and even though it was 6 months prior to the marriage, they were taking Valium at the time, and so the prenup is no longer valid. Mm-hmm. And the judge can basically do whatever they want. They can throw out a prenup if they want to, and so if they don't like one party or the other, they can rule however they want. There's essentially no oversight.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've seen over the years, and I know personally not from my own situation, but from people I know, that while I've seen both sides of this, oftentimes, and you alluded to it a bit when you were talking about the earning power of women has increased dramatically over the last few years. And I hate to say it, this sounds way, it's sort of victimization here going on, but that men are almost they're at a real serious disadvantage in divorces of late, and I think it's a difficult issue to bring up because there are many cases where that's not what's happening, but there are cases where genuinely the husband is at a financial disadvantage and continues to almost be without recourse or an ability to make enough money to sustain his own life and that of his children. I don't want to overstate this, but I think it's an important part of what you're talking about, what the film talks about, how this has swung in another direction, away from justice and about reinforcing some old notions about marriage. And is that a fair way to put it? I mean,
well, I would modify that a little bit. I think the courts try to be gender neutral. I think they try, but what happens is they're generally against the provider spouse and in favor of the dependent spouse.
Yeah.
And again, most of the time it's the dependent that comes into the courtroom with a petition to get divorced. And the one who's asking for alimony, or one who's asking for child support. And, the courts are typically deferential to the person who's complaining, the plaintiff, because that's the person who brings them business.
Yeah.
Okay, so you want to satisfy your customer. Well, they come in and ask for something. You give the customer what they want. They walk away with money, and they're really happy with you. And then they come back and do it again, or they tell their friends, "Hey, this is a great thing. You just filed for divorce, and the judge gives you a lot of money."
Yeah.
So it's good for business to be good to the plaintiff. However, I think if the plaintiff is a dependent man and the woman is working, the courts treat the woman equally badly as they do the men. It's really gender neutral. It's against the provider. Mm-hmm. They want to have a provider-dependent relationship. Mm-hmm. They almost force people into that dependent-provider roles in the courtroom so that they can order these support payments and get the federal matching. I mean, our film is very gender neutral. We tried our best to give balanced pictures from both men and women, and we found victims on both sides. Yeah. So I would not say it's really. I mean, look, there's some men's rights groups that get down on me for not pointing out that 90% of child support is paid to women still, but that's because historically women have been in the dependent role. I think it's changing. And I think over time, the gender imbalances are going to go away, but I don't know if we're going to be able to get the provider-dependent imbalances to go away without significant reform.
Okay, and that is valid. That is the way the courts see it, and it's just interesting. But things have changed in terms of are changing in terms of the earners, and you're right to point that out as well. The way the court system works, it is a very good documentary. You've done a great job here of pulling together a lot of experts in the field, and you've given the viewer a lot of options and some positive steps that we can be taking to move forward and make this such a much less painful and wrenching experience. And we didn't even get into the thing that a lot of this is driven by states. It's not necessarily a federal, although you mentioned the federal money coming in. It's the disparity between the different states that can often make a big difference in the way that these things unfold in court as well. It's a very complex issue. But I thank you so much for the documentary and for spending some time with us today.
Well, I thank you. I appreciate that. It was an extremely difficult documentary to make because the acting judges couldn't speak on the record because that's prejudicial. You can't get into courtrooms and film things, so we had to do reenactments. It was just very difficult. Sometimes you have warring parties, and one side wants to talk to the camera, the other side doesn't, and then one side doesn't want their children, so we stayed away from interviewing children. So there were a lot of limitations. We kind of had our arms tied behind our backs in many cases, but I think overall, the message we wanted to get out there is it's a $50 billion industry, and do we really need it in the United States, or at least do we need the adversarial system? Could we go to some more kind and gentle type of system? And I think there are answers in the film for that.
Yeah, and that is an excellent way to say that. This adversarial situation or relationship in court, it just begs to be abused in ways that are just wrenching and awful, not just for the principals but all the families, and the rippling effect of it is pretty devastating. And again, the view of you took this step back, and we see the big picture, which is this enormous industry and this kind of assembly line mentality that goes on in courts and with attorneys. It's thank you for that. And
well, you're welcome.
You've been listening to Film School Radio, the on-air online showcase for the best in independent documentary and foreign films. You can find out more about the program at filmschoolradio.com. I'm your host, Mike Caspar. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week with another edition of Film School Radio.
ParentalRights.us